Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, we are following very closely the following weeks. As you know, the new president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, will be sworn in on October 1st. But boy, a number of things are taking place, and in which clearly, President Manuel Lopez Obrador will be working and he will be imposing his agenda till the very end. To analyze how this transition is taking place and what to expect in the next couple of weeks before the October 1st swearing in of President Claudia Sheinbaum. Joining us today is Carlos Ramirez from Integralia. Carlos, once again, welcome to the show. There's so much going on. I don't even know where to start. Of course, there continues to be debates regarding the judicial reform, which would include the election of ministers, justices, and judges in Mexico. But the reform that is being proposed by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, which he says he will present on September 1st, 1 month before Claudia Sheinbaum will be sworn in, has many other parts of the reform that I don't think we've been analyzing or discussing publicly. Welcome to the show. What's your first take on what's happened in the last couple of weeks since the elections on June 2nd?
Thank you, Ana Maria. Thank you for having me. And yes, indeed, we are in a sort of a transition moment in which regularly, historically, the president that was ending his mandate usually became a lame duck president. Mm-hmm. And the winner of the election, the presidential election, slowly was starting to take over and to really begin to be the main driver of expectations from markets and from businesses. What we're seeing right now is something very unusual. President López Obrador continues to control the agenda. He continues with his morning press meetings. For example, this morning he spoke more than 3 hours, and he's inaugurating projects, and he's speaking continually about his legacy. And as you know, he has 18 constitutional reforms pending in Congress, the most important one being judicial reform, in which every single day he speaks about it. So he's leaving little room to the President-elect Sheinbaum, to be the main driver of news and expectations, although obviously Sheinbaum has been naming her cabinet and she has been announcing some significant issues. Now, answering your question, so now judicial reform becomes the most important probably issue from here until the 30th of September, until President Sheinbaum assumes power on October 1st. And it becomes very relevant because it will have significant implications. Whatever is approved, and it is very likely that we will have a judicial reform between the 1st of September and 30th of September before López Obrador leaves office. What is that going to look like, and what is going to be the impact for the 6-year term of Sheinbaum? I think those are the two main questions. I mean, right now, it is a given. There will be reform. The question is, will it be exactly the reform that López Obrador proposed, or there will be significant changes to the initiative? Will Sheinbaum be able to in some way or another dilute some of the aspects more worrying about AMLO's initiative? Does she really want to dilute it? Or we will end up with a bad choice and a bad reform that could complicate the entire administration of President Sheinbaum.
Now, the most controversial part of this reform, of course, has to do with the election of judges and justices and magistrates. Do you, and I think there has been comments from academics and experts within Mexico, around the world. I mean, there's been a lot of warnings that this is a disastrous um, reform,
Yes.
constitutional reform in regards to the election of judges. So I guess the question is, what other aspects of the reform could be approved that could also create a lot of anxieties? I mean, it seems that at this point, the election of judges is going to stay, or at least they're going to vote on it. That's my perception. I don't know what you see at this point, but it just seems that, Andres Manuel is so determined, because it's him, to make sure that this reform is passed. So I guess the question is, what other aspects of these reforms do you think have some wiggle room or that could be changed?
Yeah. So yeah, Lopez Obrador wants to leave office, let's put it this way, as a hero in terms of having approved a judicial reform that is remembered in the coming years, which is quite dangerous to have a president wanting to leave office with a reform that everyone knows that it is not the best reform. We know it. Everyone knows it. Sheinbaum knows it. But even though we are going to go with a reform. So what other aspects are there that could be potentially problematic for Mexico's rule of law? There are several. It is not only the direct election of ministers, judges, that actually no other country in the world does have an experiment like this, only Bolivia, and it has been a disaster. But there's also two other things that worry me a lot. Injunctions. So Mexico has a long story with injunctions in terms of it was originally created as a way for the private individuals and private companies to defend themselves against arbitrary decisions by the state. Okay, that was the original intention of injunctions. Yes, we could argue that probably in some ways or in some others, it has been exploited by the private sector to block things or whatever. But at the end of the day, it is a very important right that Mexicans have to defend themselves against arbitrary decisions by the state. Well, injunctions will be weakened with this reform. And that is a clear intention of the reform. Nobody's speaking about that, but it is also one of the elements of the reform. So at the end of the day, if this reform is approved, private sector and individuals will have less protection against the state's arbitrary decisions. There's other two that I will mention. The other one that is very risky is that the proposal wants to create like a super institution above the Supreme Court and above the judicial sector that will be measuring the decisions of judges, right? And they will qualify if the judge is taking the correct decision or not, which is crazy.
It's crazy.
Because actually what is going to happen is that the judge is going to be very cautious in his decision making, because at the end of the day, this supra institution will be watching what the judge is deciding. Can you imagine if he believes there's a decision to be taken that goes against the interest of the government, which is very likely to happen in many cases, and this new institution will be able to judge that? Crazy. And one other, fiscal events. Mexican companies, sometimes they don't agree with what the tax authority decides about taxes. So they go to the Supreme Court and try to protect what they firmly believe is their right. Well, now the Supreme Court will have to decide in less than 6 months every fiscal case above certain amount of money, which will put enormous pressure against the Supreme Court to vote in favor of the tax authority. So those are only three more examples about how dangerous and really risky this reform is.
Now, do you, let's just talk a little bit about the way President-elect Claudia Sheinbaum is handling the transition, which I think has been also been very, very interesting. I mean, she's, you know, like you said, she's kind of like taking a step back. She clearly is respecting Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador's, you know, position as president. But there seems to be, you know, in between the appointments she has made, which some of them are very, very interesting appointments of a very experienced people who have a very different profile, perhaps, than what Andrés Manuel López Obrador expectations or the expectations we had of his cabinet. But there seems to be messages are being sent. You know, the way the whole process is taking place, Carlos, it kind of reminds me how in the Cold War, we had to kind of analyze what was happening in Russia just based on kind of the headlines of the officially controlled newspapers and comments off, you know, kind of comments that were being made or rumors that were being that you could pick up. So, I mean, it's kind of trying to read through some of the messages that are being sent from the Claudia Sheinbaum's camp or even the president-elect herself throughout this that is being sent to Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or am I wrong?
No, you're right. You're entirely right. So my view about, I mean, you are right, and I like your
Description.
your Cold War remembrance, right?
Right.
Yes, it's difficult to read exactly what is in the mind of Sheinbaum. The first word that comes to my mind about seeing the cabinet she has put in place is continuity. A lot of continuity. Although I think this cabinet is much better than the one that López Obrador had at the beginning of his administration. It is clearly a more experienced, a more technocratic, definitely, there's no question about it. But recall that López Obrador in 2018 also had a respected cabinet, but eventually most of the, let's say, of the soft members of his cabinet ended up going away from his government. And he ended up governing with, let's say, the more radicals. Right now, we're seeing more pragmatists than radicals in his government. But a lot looks like continuity. There are certain names that are very close to López Obrador, which is normal, because Sheinbaum comes from the same movement, Ana Maria. Let us not forget that, because sometimes some people tend to think about Sheinbaum being very different than López Obrador. No, she comes from the same world, from the same ideas, from the same movement. She has been with López Obrador 24 years without any interruption. She has been one of the most loyal, and that's why López Obrador handpicked her. So those who are expecting major shifts in terms of policy, in my appreciation, are going to be wrong. Yes, my view is that there will be changes, definitely, because there's urgent needs in terms of changing some of the most negative policies of the López Obrador administration. But my sense is that they won't be very, I mean, they will be gradual. They will try to maintain the most relevant legacies of López Obrador. Some shifts, yes, but more in the, let's say, quite gradual and not very disruptive. So yeah, that's what you read in the cabinet. I mean, you have Ebrard. He's definitely someone close to the private sector. He has experience. He's going to manage the USMCA in the Sunset Clause review. So perfect, but don't expect him to bring very different views on what he did during the AMLO administration. The same with the Minister of Interior, Rosa Isela. I mean,
Right.
she has shown us who she is during 6 years, or the past 3 at least, where she has been the Minister of Security. And we see her almost every day in the morning meetings, basically saying what Lopez Obrador has wanted to tell us. So don't expect major changes there. And yes, a lot of continuity with Lopez Obrador. I don't see Lopez Obrador naming these people. I think Sheinbaum named them because she wants them to be there and to provide continuity with the overall project of Lopez Obrador.
You know, I was kind of shocked, not shocked, well, nothing shocks me anymore, when the rumor started that the current Secretary of Gobernación, who's a relatively young woman, but she's also very close to Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, she's been with the movement since she was very young, and and there was rumors that she could be the person who could alcalde, could be the person who could take over the party, which is also a very important position. And it's also a position that assures Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador's legacy by controlling Morena. And he came out, and I don't know why he did that. You know, he came out, you know, as this rumor was, you know, or as at least it's still a rumor because it's not official, but he came out and he showed these videos of her, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, when she was kind of doing these spots for Morena of her dancing on the bus and singing. And you know, it's one of the things that she has been criticized, is in part, or made fun of, because she was kind of these dancers in these spots, which, I mean, she was a young woman, and it's totally, it's perfectly explainable, but still, I mean, why would he do that?
But
Because
who
it
did
seems like
this?
he's
Who
almost
did
trying to
this?
weaken her.
I'm sorry, Ana Maria, who did this?
Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador doing the
Oh,
morning
okay.
press.
Sorry.
You know what I mean? It was just the craziest thing. Why, you know, it's not even confirmed that she's going to be the next person to lead Morena. They don't even know how they're going to choose Morena's next leader. And he's already kind of putting this video of her 20 years ago, or I don't know how many years ago, where she was a very young woman. She's still a young woman, but it's almost, I don't understand why he did that. Is it to strengthen her the way we view her? Is it to weaken her? Is it, you know what I mean? It's just crazy, or just to remind everybody how close he is to her. I have no idea. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but
Talk
probably
about crazy message.
we're reading too much into it, in my sense. I mean, Lopez Obrador always plays with our emotions. Let us
Right.
not forget that. So he tries, obviously, to play with the emotions of Mexicans. And no, definitely this is a support for her. He shows her in this awkward situation 20 years ago to send a message that she is part of the movement, that she was there 20 years ago when she was a teenager and she danced, and so she's supporting her.
Right.
And definitely it's a message towards the party that this woman is someone I like. So no, I read it as a clear support. We know that Alcalde will definitely be the president of Morena. There's no question about it, because actually the only other contender already has declined and supports the Alcalde. So no, AMLO loves her. AMLO
Oh,
absolutely loves her. But let me be clear also about this. Sheinbaum also.
right.
Sheinbaum has a long story with the alcaldes, and she was definitely gonna remain in the cabinet, but eventually she could not remain in the interior minister, so she preferred to go to the party, but she will have a very significant role, and the other two alcaldes, because there's other two sisters, will have very relevant posts during the Sheinbaum administration. So no,
which kind of confirms your hypothesis, which
Yeah,
is, you know, the people that she is appointing, the president-elect, is the continuity of the Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador version of or his vision
yeah.
for Mexico. Any one last question. What else should we be watching in the next couple of weeks? Of course, you know, there's a lot of nervousness about these reforms, and there's kind of this, you know, they've been trying to link it to the exchange rate, the peso exchange rate. So if the pesos improves, that means that the market is supporting the reforms. I mean, it's a little crazy, but so I'm just trying to get a sense, what other surprises could we expect in the next couple of weeks, or just we're going to assume it's going to be a pretty not uneventful, but the transition is going to take place in a way that it's not going to create a confrontation between the outgoing president and the
Oh, no.
incoming president, which
No,
seems that
definitely.
that's what.
Yeah, don't expect any confrontation at all. Not
Mhm.
only through the transition, but during the 6-year term of Sheinbaum. Never, never, never she will come out and say something against Lopez Obrador.
Mhm.
What to expect? I would highlight some signposts. One, we still don't have the names of the Pemex and CFE CEOs. Very important. I think it's going to be a very key message to the markets and to overall the private sector, because those names, if they look too political,
Mhm.
um, I think it's going to be a disappointment, because it's going to look like, okay, so it's going to be basically policy just as we have seen so far, without the
Mhm.
cost that that could bring in terms of continuity. But
Right.
at the end of the day, I think it's very important. Also, Sheinbaum has said that she will announce her energy policy
Mhm.
relatively soon, probably in a couple of weeks or so. I think it's very important to look exactly what is in that
Mhm.
overall policy, because a lot of private sector uh, players are very, are expecting a lot about Sheinbaum in terms of renewables, bringing back the private sector, reopening the overall the sector to the private sector. Okay, it's great, but they might be disappointed. And they might end up being
And,
disappointed.
and what does that mean that they're disappointed? I mean,
Yeah,
that's the big issue. I mean, does it mean that investments that they were planning to do in Mexico, and perhaps it could have an impact on the nearshoring strategy? Would they take out investments? I mean, because there is, of course, huge concerns to have access to energy, access to electricity, and
yeah,
clean energy, which
yeah,
is, they talk about it, but that would imply an important change in Mexican policy. Simply because this is the way I'm viewing it. I mean, it's really hard for Mexico to, ramp up its production of electricity if they don't have more involvement of the private, of some kind of more involvement of the
yes,
private sector,
yeah,
and kind of a confrontation of what is the future of Pemex, which you and I were
absolutely.
talking off air, is could potentially drag down the Mexican economy and potentially create a crisis,
Yeah,
um, as the rating companies start to question the viability of Pemex. So, I mean, it would be interesting to try to figure out how she's going to solve that without having an open contradiction with the way Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador views the future of Mexico's energy sector.
absolutely. I think that's the big question about Sheinbaum. How is she going to deal with all these contradictions? It is not only in energy, by the way. It is in security. It is in energy. It is in health. It is in infrastructure. It is in education. It is everywhere, Ana Maria.
Mm-hmm.
The legacy is not good overall. So the question is, if Sheinbaum maintains the status quo in all these areas, she's going to fail. Absolutely. She's going to fail. And at the same time, she cannot do a U-turn because it's going to look like a big shift in terms of against of AMLO's policies. So my sense, my forecast is that she will try to muddle through something in between. She will not continue exactly with the same policies of Lopez Obrador, but she will not do major U-turns. So she will try to move something in the middle. Why I mentioned disappointment, because there's a lot of expectations of Sheinbaum changing energy policy. I don't see that happening. My sense is that it's going to be gradual. There's going to be more private investment opportunities, definitely, but it's going to be gradual. She's not going to abandon CFE. She's not going to abandon Pemex. She will continue with a nationalistic view on energy. She will maintain the overall views of Lopez Obrador. But yes, in that space, in that relatively open space, there will be some changes, but don't expect, my sense, that's my forecast, major dramatic shifts on policies on almost anything,
That's interesting because, like you said, I mean, there is concern as to what Mexico's going to look like in 6 years. You know, of course, there's a lot of expectations that the whole nearshoring process and the renegotiation, the sunset clause of the USMCA will open even more opportunities so that in the next, you know, in the next 6 years, you know, she would be able to show an enormous and important growth, development, maybe, you know, reduce poverty. I mean, and you know, there's high expectation. I mean, the opportunity is there.
The opportunity is there.
Because,
Definitely.
and I guess it sounds like what you're saying is that, you know, it's not going to happen potentially in the next 6 years.
She will have to, my sense, and I think that's again the main issue to be decided by Sheinbaum. She has probably, I mean, one of the best opportunities to deliver a much better government than Lopez Obrador, which, by the way, is not going to be very difficult because most indicators are not looking fantastic, right? So there's a low-hanging fruit in the sense of if you do a little bit more and a little bit better things, numbers are going to look better. But that is not enough because this country needs to grow at least at 4%. This country needs to reduce poverty much quicker. This country needs much more investment. The question is if we are going to capture that opportunity. My sense is that Sheinbaum will try to maneuver and handle at the same time having so much power, changing the institutions of Mexico, changing the Constitution overall, because we're going to have big changes in the Constitution to consolidate the power of Morena, and at the same time, try to be successful on the economic front. Can you do both? Can you have this very concentrated power in one person and no checks and balances, and at the same time be economically successful? I don't think you can do it. But my sense is that she's going to try it.
Yeah, there's models out there. I mean, look at the China model. I mean, some would argue that's except I mean, it is kind of sacrificing because in order to have that type of control, you end up sacrificing enormous advancements that had been made on Mexico's democracy. And it seems like we're returning to the one-party system, which is, you know, that's what people voted for.
That's what people voted, but that's where we come from. And we already have an experience of 70 years with one party and how that ended. It didn't end well. So,
well, yeah,
I think the pendulum is moving exactly in the other way around. Again, we're going back to where we were probably in the 70s, 80s.
It's always good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ana Maria.
Thank you so much for joining us here and living in Mexico. We're going to go to commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar.